All right, mastermind members, or whatever we want to call you guys, storytellers. I don't know. We changed the name last week. So today my guest is going to be Kevin Kienitz. He is a wedding photographer in Chicago. One of my favorites to work with, and also he is way more into the backup stuff than I have been in the past. So rather than just make up stuff, I figured we'll have Kevin tell you about his process. Like I said, he's based out of Chicago. He's got his own little Facebook group. Is it Shadow and Light, Light and Shadow?
Shadow and Light, yeah.
Shadow and Light. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So Shadow and Light.
Yeah, we can post a link to it later.
Yeah, we really should. Anyway, so yeah, let's kind of get into this. So we're talking backups and storage systems for all the photos you're taking and the ones on your camera. Just make sure you don't lose anything for those clients and deal with really angry clients afterwards. So Kev, tell me a little bit about your system.
Pretty much it. Yeah. So, I guess let me start off by saying, so a lot of you, if you've been in any of the other groups like Ben's group, you probably noticed me as the guy who's posted about this thing a few times. It's kind of come up. It's kind of been my claim to fame in Ben's group is just posting links to this thing. But really like last year I started taking backups and my magic box of all my SD cards. But yeah, I started like last year kind of getting into the busiest wedding season I've ever had and really feeling a lot of anxiety with not feeling like I had a process for backing up and setting up a workflow for, my photo business that was really, that gave me the confidence that I needed. So last year I put a lot of effort into really redesigning everything and to get to a point to where, I've got all my photos, especially everything that I'm currently working on and working through editing and then delivering to clients and just making sure that it's kept safe, it's secure. And then not only in the short term, but just also in the long term.
Yeah. It's a little bit of future proofing. So you don't, again, deal with angry clients or miss, I've had some times where I've gotten back and I've like, oh, did I miss that? I forget to upload it. And it's in like the third card I ended up having to use. Sometimes I've gone over, I don't know. There was one wedding I remember last year. For some reason, I only had a 32 gigabyte, like in my deck, and Kevin knows this personally, but I can't shoot a wedding on a 32 gigabyte card. I am an overshooter by far.
Honestly, I don't know who could. I mean, I certainly can. I mean, my go-to is definitely 128s, and like I've definitely had plenty of times where I've even filled up a 128, so it's not uncommon.
I've filled them up. Like I think on average, I'll fill up one to at least like almost full capacity. I can't remember one where I've actually had to use two of those. Besides the wedding I shot for you, where I had on bracketing mode the whole time. So basically, if you don't know, bracketing mode.
Yeah, that was a fun one. Yeah.
It shoots 3 images for every 1 image you try and take. And I also tend to lay on the shutter. So I'm trying to grab all these mini moments and my camera's taking, 9, 12, whatever images for me laying on the shutter for like a second. It was a lot.
Well, and the worst part about it is you weren't even like white balance, or I think you were in like white balance bracketing. So, and then combine that with my workflow. When I import everything into Lightroom, I automatically white balance everything. So on my end, it was literally just 3 identical photos, every single photo for like half the wedding. So yeah, thanks again.
Yeah. I mean, if it makes you feel better, I never went through and adjust. I've never even looked through the photos because I knew how much of a pain it would be to go through like, okay, this one and then this one. And is this a different photo? I can't tell. I don't know.
Yeah.
But hey, on the bright side, you wouldn't have lost any of those.
Speaking of SD cards, that is true. Yeah, I've definitely had plenty of backups just on the SD card itself. But actually, I mean, talking about SD cards, that's actually probably a good place to really start off a lot of this conversation is starting with SD cards. Definitely at a wedding, like my go-to is, I mean, I've got 2 bodies, that. I think you've got 2 A7 IIIs. I've got an A7 III and an A7R III, both have dual memory card slots. And at a wedding, that's, the very first thing I do is I make sure that everything is backed up on both of those cards while I shoot. And I actually had this past weekend a very good example of why I do that. So I had, it was like halfway through, it was the second wedding of the weekend, and I was already like most of the way through family formals after the ceremony. And usually what I do is as I'm taking those family formal photos, what I'm doing is I'll take a few of a group, and then while they're starting to kind of get restructured and get the next group going, I'll just, grab my camera, hit the playback button, just make sure I've got 1 or 2 that are in focus. Sometimes, things hunt and they grabs the background instead. I just want to make sure I at least have 1 in focus. And I usually do that as I'm shooting through the family formals. And at one point, I went to hit the playback button, and sure enough, I got an error that popped up. And it was like one of those errors was like, would you like to try to rebuild this image? I hit yes. And then gave me another error. Would you like to rebuild the database? And then I went through a series of basically menu options. And next thing I know, it said, basically, sorry, rebuilding the database. And then I hit the playback button and nothing was there.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, this was definitely an example of, one of those weekends where, and to be clear, I mean, I've been shooting, weddings since 2017. And this is the first time I've had something like this happen. So, I mean, and I've always told myself I'm always going to shoot 2 memory cards, and this is exactly why. It's rare; it doesn't happen very often, but it definitely can happen. And thankfully, when I got home, I grabbed that second memory card, I threw it in my computer, and thankfully everything was there. I was able to back up everything, offload it, get it in multiple locations, and keep it safe. But yeah, for me, that's definitely where everything begins: is 2 memory cards at a wedding day, both cameras. And then I keep those memory cards pretty much all the way through the process while I edit and up until when I deliver. I don't format memory cards until after I actually deliver the images to the couples. And I know that can be kind of it's somewhat of a controversial thing. Some people disagree with it. Some people prefer to, format the cards as soon as they get them backed up into multiple locations. And really, in my opinion, there's really there's no wrong way of doing it. The most important thing is that as long as you have them backed up somewhere, it's just that for me, and I know a lot of other people, we prefer not to kind of delete that first original copy that, is on the SD card. And that's the way I view it. That SD card copy, that is the original file. That's the file as it was created by the camera, written to the memory card. And there are occasions where when you go to import things either via Lightroom or just do a copy and drag, sometimes things get corrupted during that file transfer process. And so if you just go ahead and format that card right away, you never know what you might miss, if something does get corrupted during that transfer process. So keeping those originals on the memory card for me, that makes me just feel a little bit safer. And at the end of the day, as long as you're okay with spending a few extra dollars on memory cards, I honestly don't see a problem with it. To me, it's just an extra level of safeguarding. So that's definitely, the first thing that I do is 2 memory cards. And then I do not delete those memory cards until, I deliver those to the clients.
Do you have any like softwares that you use as like a backup just in case one of they both fail, like a recover software of some sort that you go to?
To be honest, I don't. And that's only because I really haven't had to use it. Again, I mean, this last weekend was really the first time in, however many years that I really had an error with the card. And thankfully I had everything on the second card. So I really didn't need to go back and recover it. I do, for some of the other stuff that I use for backing up and archiving, I use some Seagate Ironwolf drives, which have like a Rescue Plus software type of thing that kind of comes included with those. I do have that. That's always kind of in my back pocket that I know about, but I've never actually had direct experience just because thankfully up to this point, I've been pretty well protected and haven't really had to go through that process of trying to recover a drive. And thankfully, and if you have a good backup process, you never will. You'll always have another copy of that somewhere else. You can just rebuild that drive rather than having to send it off and have a service kind of repair it and try to retrieve that data off that failed drive. So I prefer, just to keep things backed up in multiple locations and just replace it rather than have to get it repaired.
Yeah, luckily, I mean, the only time I think I've ever actually lost images, they weren't wedding images. It was back when I used to shoot street photography. So really since like, I want to say maybe a year into shooting, I've always had 2 cards. So it wasn't like a major issue, but I uploaded a bunch of them into like a old hard drive. And, as time goes on, everyone's editing style kind of evolves and changes. And so that entire drive of RAWs, I can't remember exactly what happened to the hard drive, but it corrupted or broke or I dropped it somewhere. It's probably that one. And like I lost every photo from that entire year. And thankfully, with my wedding system, which is considerably less advanced than yours, I really have never lost like a full wedding or anything like that. But I've had a few times where like I've had that anxiety kind of just hitting like, oh, this is missing, even though it wasn't. Mentally it was there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's the worst feeling in the world for me. Like I see people who post it in Facebook groups or wherever else where they talk about how they've lost images and they've got to go back and say, hey, like, sorry, client, like I don't have anything, or I missed this entire part of the day. And to me, that is my worst fear. I never would want to have to go and have to go to a client and say that, hey, I dropped the ball. I've lost your image. It's like, to me, that would just be, I'd be gutted. Like I'd want to just dig my head in the sand and just never show my face again and just completely bow out of doing weddings after that. Like that's how bad I would feel. Like I just can't even imagine like me getting, a couple that's unhappy about one photo that they actually got and delivered to them. Like that in and of itself is like, oh man. So, I mean, like completely losing images like that, it's just, I can't even like, and that's part of the reason why I think, I had a lot of anxiety kind of going into last year, knowing how many weddings I had. And really, I think that's what drove that process for me to really start digging into creating something new. So, So I think that's probably a good segue into kind of talking more about kind of what's the process like, after I get back from a wedding and I actually get home and I get into my office and I actually start doing that whole process. So, obviously we've got the 2 memory cards from the wedding, from the cameras, and that's 2 memory cards per camera. So for me,
Sure.
shooting 2 cameras, that's 4 cards, right? So I get home, I've got those cards. The first card comes out of the camera, it goes into my computer, and then my first step is I actually import everything into Lightroom. Some people prefer to go through like Photo Mechanic or some other calling software first. I don't do that. And the reason why is because that is a workflow and a system that prioritizes essentially deleting images before rather than backing up images. And what I mean by that is people usually do that. They want to call first because they say, well, I don't want to have to save all of these bad images, like all the blurry images, all the ones that are clearly out of focus, photos of my feet. Like, I don't want to have to keep any of those. So I'm going to call it first and get rid of those and then import. But the problem with
Yeah.
that is in and of itself a process that prioritizes deletion first rather than backing up first. And for me, that's a no-no. I'd rather deal with the process of having a bunch of images that I know I'll never use, that are completely out of focus, that are way overexposed, way underexposed. I'd rather keep those and delete them after I deliver the wedding rather than prioritize a process that focuses on deletion first rather than backing up first. So when I get home, everything goes into Lightroom. Every bad photo I took, everything that's out of focus, everything that I'll never use in a million years, it goes into Lightroom and it gets backed up onto a bunch of different drives. And the reason why I do Lightroom is it also makes it a little bit easier to automatically write it to do different drives as well. Because if you go into the import menu on Lightroom, there's actually the option, obviously, to import it to whatever drive you're going to use to access those files from. But also at the very top on the right-hand panel, it gives you the option to create a secondary backup to another drive. So as I'm importing those files, when I get home from a wedding, it's immediately creating 2 more copies of those files just right off the bat. So that's really the first thing that I do when I get home. So I'm actually curious, what's your process look like when you get back from a wedding? Do you import through Lightroom first, or do you do like a Photo Mechanic type of thing?
No, I don't ever. So at Lightroom is the
Just no.
last stage for me. So
Okay.
I bring in both cards. I do one camera at a time. So I'll bump them in my multi-card reader. And then I will clone the wedding from both cards over into an external drive. Then that external drive is connected to Backblaze, and then it's pulled directly into culling software. And then I go through like it's not really a deleting process, but like I'm only adding images into Lightroom that actually need to be in Lightroom.
Okay.
And then from there, it's really simple because the culling software basically has been trained. I've brought in, I think, like 500,000 images into it at this point. So it's a fairly trained system. And then kind of go through, double check, make sure the images that I actually want to go to Lightroom are actually going to Lightroom. And then it's brought into Imagine AI and then delivered to PicTime. So it's definitely not, I'm not bringing anything into Lightroom right off the bat. And that's only because I don't want Lightroom to slow down. That's one of the few programs that I just wanted to keep it as fast as humanly possible. And I also don't want to have to go through the images that many times. Like I'll do it in the culling software and I'll do it in a double check of the culling software. But outside of that, like for me, I don't put any value on those images that are kind of missed. I'd rather unless it's like a portrait of someone specific and I didn't get any sort of image whatsoever of them, I'm okay with telling them like I don't have a better option. That is the photo. That's just me though.
Okay. So that's interesting. But the most important thing is, though, when you get back, you're basically just doing like a click and drag and copy rather than going through and like having your memory card inserted into the camera and then pulling it up in like, say, Photo Mechanic or whatever calling software you use and starting to reject, right?
It's ejected from the camera and then attached to, and then it's cloned into a drive, and then that drive is cloned into a backup system,
Okay.
and then brought into Lightroom and all that stuff. And then
So
when it's done is when I triple backle it up. Like when everything's edited, Amazon Photo, Google Drive, PicTime, and all those other softwares. Those are my backups for the edited images.
Okay. So, but you still have all the raw images. They're just not all pulled into Lightroom essentially. So they're still out there somewhere. Okay.
Yeah. They get deleted later on.
Okay, but fine. But while you're editing the photo, while you're editing the wedding, you still have all of the original raw files. They're just not necessarily in your Lightroom catalog.
Yes.
Okay, and that makes sense, and I think that's a totally fair way of doing it. I know there's some people who will literally they'll call right off the memory card, and to me, like no, like everything's got to get imported somewhere first. And to me, that's number one. And again, I'll preface this by saying like what I do is not the only way of doing things. There's a million ways of going about doing this in a very safe manner and having a good solid workflow set up. It's just that I know there's definitely some very wrong ways of doing it too. So, but that's the most important thing. As long as you've got those raw images somewhere. I think that's what's most important. And I can totally understand not wanting to bring everything into Lightroom. I just prefer to, while I'm doing the culling through Lightroom,
Sure.
I'll just basically use that reject button. And when I come across a photo I know I'll never use because it's way out of focus or whatever, I just use the reject feature, marks it for rejection. And then after I edit everything and deliver it to that couple, I go back to that wedding and I filter by all the rejected photos, and then I delete them off. I delete them out of Lightroom and I delete them off my catalog and my files that way. So that's the way I personally go about it, just because I prefer to prioritize, bringing everything in and having it all somewhere and then kind of doing the deletion afterwards. But again, as long as you've got the raw files somewhere, I
Yeah.
think that's
Is there any reason that you prefer doing that versus like having a culling software ingest them? Because it's still just copying them over. They don't disappear.
I just don't particularly like calling software. Any of the software I've tried, whether it's like Aftershoot or or any of the others. The only one I kind of like is Select from Narrative, only because that one it's just giving you extra tools to do the selection yourself.
Sure.
And for me, in my experience in using a lot of the software, it doesn't understand what is an image that I view as good. Like, because I'll do a lot of things like shutter drags where I purposely try to blur things out, and that software does a really bad job at that sort of stuff. And my experience does a really bad job of things where it's not like more artistic photos. It
Sure.
doesn't see what you're trying to see, and so I prefer just to kind of go through and just call it on my own rather than having it do it for me. And that's one of the reasons why I prefer Select, is just because it just gives me extra tools to do it myself rather than trying to do it for me and then have me kind of go back and double check it later.
Yeah, I would say the one thing that's maybe a little off with a lot of, I mean, everyone has this expectation, like if they get Aftershoot, it's out of the box, fine. That's not how those softwares work. So and Aftershoot especially, like you have to upload a lot of images before it actually learns your style. So when you're talking about like, oh, it's gonna, it pulls out my creative images. No, over time it learns them, but you have to do like 15 weddings before it actually learns
Right.
exactly what you're looking for.
But you also, at that point, you're also paying that to learn your style, and I'd rather just kind of do it on my own. So
Yeah, well, it's an overtime thing. So like for
yeah,
me personally, my journey was, okay, I'm gonna bring all these images in. I'm gonna go through and have it select what I want to select. I'm gonna go double check that, and then over time, it's just gotten much better to where like, I think originally like going through it probably took me 2 hours to recall a wedding from Aftershoot, and then now that it's learned my preferences, my software, usually like 20 minutes, it's like I'm good. But it wasn't like out of the box. It's just not how it works. It's machine learning, really, is what it is.
and I understand that. It's just
Yeah.
for me, it's just I don't know. I can't get past the part of having to basically pay for software while it learns my style and having to basically babysit it and pay for it to do so. And it's still going to miss things. It's never going to be 100% perfect. And on top of that, I just don't mind doing the calling. And
Yep.
and if I was doing like 60, 70 weddings a year, then I would either hire somebody to do the calling and the editing for me, or I probably at that point I would kind of have to switch over to something like that. But at this point where I'm not doing that kind of high volume of weddings, I'm totally okay with just kind of editing and calling on my own. But anyways, yeah, that's the calling side.
How many are you shooting a year?
So like last year, for example, I had just over 30. And then this year it's going to be, I kind of pulled it back to about 24, 25. So I might take on 1 or 2 more this year, but I'm not going to I don't want to do like I did last year. And last year, just to be clear, it was like 35-ish on my own. And then it was plus a lot of second shooting because it's so many people needed people last minute. And I felt bad turning it down because I knew I needed a lot of people last minute.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, between everything, it was just, last year was just insane. And so, yeah, if I was doing anything more than that, or if I was going to continue to do like that kind of volume of weddings, then I would probably do that. But at around like that 24 to 25 mark, I'm totally comfortable just doing them on my own.
Yeah, last year was wild. We did the full count and under my own brand because I had risk. Like people have always booked me years in advance, like 2-3 years in advance. It's just been a constant thing for the brand. Last year alone, I did like 63 or 64 under my own, and then helping everyone else second shoot. I ended up at about 72. So like we did a lot of weddings in the middle. I was doing a lot of triples. I will never do that to myself again. As a brand limit now, we're 12 to 18 a year. I'm not doing any more than that. There's just no. I don't want to.
Many. I mean, there's people that do 115 a year as a large studio that have like 4 or 5 people underneath their brand. So I mean and for them that's a lot. So yeah, 70 to be a 1-person studio, that's just absurd. You can't maintain that sort of that tempo. You can't do that.
No, that's why. So we took the whole. I've called it a sabbatical, but like January to now, I've basically been off.
Yeah. or if you do that kind of level, at some point something's going to give, and at some point the level of customer service, the ability, the amount of attention that you can give to your clients is just going to take a hit, and it's not worth it. So, and especially if you're trying to build, a $5,000, $7,000, $10,000, wedding business, like you've got to be able to have that time to dedicate to those couples to give them the attention they deserve, because they're going to expect it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah. But yeah, anyway, so kind of moving on here. So actually, I sent you that PDF. This might be a good time to pull that up, because we're going to be kind of getting into more of kind of the nitty gritty here in terms of kind of what I do. So we talked about memory cards, 2 memory cards per camera at the wedding. Get home, those memory cards come out. They go in the computer. I bring them into Lightroom. Lightroom imports them, and it brings them into 2 drives. The first drive that it kind of brings them onto is an SSD. So I've got a 2 terabyte SSD, which is kind of my editing drive. So all my current projects, all my current weddings basically go on that drive. And I do that just because that SSD, it's one of the Samsung T7. So it's one of the really, really fast ones. Yeah, so that 2 terabyte SSD, everything goes on there. That's kind of the primary drive where everything kind of gets brought up onto. And that's what I edit off of.
Okay.
So that's my main editing drive. Now, in addition to that, like I said, when I import it into Lightroom, I bring it into 2 locations. So the other location that I put it on is my NAS device. So that's kind of that one right there in the center. It's
The
that
30 terabyte
30
thing?
terabyte. Yeah, so that's my NAS device. So if you're not familiar with what a NAS is, for anybody who's listening, it basically just stands for network attached storage. But for the sake of kind of listening today, kind of just think of it as basically just a big ass hard drive. It does a lot more than that. It's got a lot of capabilities, but really it's an array of drives with a lot of storage. And that is really kind of like my main single point archive for everything. So within my Lightroom catalog, I've got 2 locations where there's photos. There's the SSD, which I edited off of, and then that's kind of my short-term editing. And then there's my NAS device, and that is kind of my long-term storage. So eventually, even my Lightroom catalog, it eventually points to all the files on the NAS. At the very beginning, it's looking for those files on the SSD, but eventually it's going to get pointed to look for those files on the NAS device. So those are the 2 locations that they get brought into as soon as I get home. So at that point, I've done the import for both cameras. So now I've got basically 4 copies. I've got 1 copy on each of the 2 SD cards that were in the camera, and then now I've got a copy on the SSD, and I've got a copy on the NAS device. So now once I've imported all that, the next thing I do is I copy that folder for that wedding that has all the images for myself and my second shooter, if I have one, and then I take that folder and I copy it to kind of that 3rd drive, which is that hard drive, that 8 terabyte long-term offsite archive. So I've also posted about this in Ben's group if anybody's seen that before. So essentially, this is basically just a hard drive doc, and I just put raw hard drive. So no enclosure, no nothing. You just buy the raw hard drive like you would from like Micro Center or Amazon or B&H or whatever. That goes in that hard drive dock, and then everything gets basically loaded up onto that. And then I've got these nifty cases here where I just put all my hard drives into this, and then this becomes my offsite storage. And I've got like 5 or 6 of these at a friend's house down the street, and then I just pick this thing up every now and again. I update it, add files to it, and then I walk it back over there when I'm walking the dog, drop it off, and then I just keep them over there. So that way I've got an offsite storage. I like doing it this way. And this is really, again, this is my long-term offsite storage. So this is like, if my NAS ever goes down or whatever, I've always got something that's local. I can walk down the street, pick up these drives. I can rebuild everything off of these. So this is really kind of like the 5th place where they all go. And this is like really my main offsite archive. And I do it this way because, quite frankly, it's cheaper than trying to back up my entire NAS device to say Backblaze. Because right now I've got the 30 terabyte NAS and I've got something like 20 terabytes on it. So to try to store 20 terabytes of data on Backblaze, especially if you started from ground zero with Backblaze, maybe it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But to try to add 20 terabytes to it now doesn't really make sense. And on top of it, if I ever did have an issue where my NAS went down, I had to rebuild it. And I would Backblaze would just end up sending me a bunch of physical hard drives anyway. So I might as well just make my own, keep them down the street. And if I need them, I can just go walk down the street and get them the same day and start rebuilding.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just so I'm clear, are you ever deleting any RAWs at all, or are you keeping them all?
Like I said, I go through, while I'm doing the calling, I'll find ones that I'm rejecting. So anything that's like massively out of focus, like a photo that's like of my feet, of the wall, of the ground, like something that's way over. So like all the photos I know that I'll never use in a million years, I mark them as rejected. Those get deleted after I deliver the files to the clients. But other than that, for a wedding, like I've got every wedding I've ever shot all the way back to 2017. So
Okay.
I don't delete any of that stuff. So that all stays up. Same thing with all my pick time. galleries, I don't delete them. I keep them up. Even if they expire, I don't actually take them down. If anybody ever comes back up and wants to like purchase them or make them reactivated, they're already there. I can just basically just reactivate it. But I don't take any of it down. I can like, I don't even have that included on here, but that's also kind of like an additional level of kind of cloud backup storage for photos. But I'm already paying for it. I've got unlimited storage. I might as well use it. So I just leave them up there. But yeah, no, I don't delete anything. I keep it for as long as possible because I want to have that ability. If a couple ever comes back to me like, hey, we lost our images, what can we do? I want to be able to go back and have those images. Or two, editing styles change. I know mine certainly has changed a lot over the years. So to have those raw files and really kind of go back and re-edit them and play with them and see things that I didn't really see before when my eye maybe wasn't quite as well trained as maybe is now.
Sure.
For all those reasons, I just like to hang on to them and keep them. And quite frankly, in my opinion, data is pretty cheap, so it's not a big deal.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, it's not a crazy amount of money. I mean, that 30 terabyte NAS device. I mean, it's like 1,800 the last time I looked at them. I think somewhere around there.
So the NAS device that I actually have itself, it's the Synology DS1621 Plus. And I bought that for, I think it was $800 or $900 for the enclosure itself, but then you got to fill it with hard drives. You do need like NAS specific drives because they're meant to run in close proximity to each other, and they run pretty much 24/7. So they're slightly more robust drives. Now I know there's some people that talk about shucking drives, but that's another conversation for another day. But anyways, those drives.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, we won't get into it. That's another conversation for another day. But nonetheless, the drives that I used, they were like $180 to $200 a piece, depending on when you got them. I happened to get them on sale, and they're pretty often on sale. So they're about $180 a piece when I got them. And then I've got right now five 8 terabyte drives in there. So, and I still have the ability to add one more. And then this unit that I have in particular, this Synology unit, you can actually add expansion bays to it, up to 2 expansion bays, 5 bays each. So ultimately this thing goes up to 16 total bays. So I think the last time I did the math, I can upgrade this storage pool up to over 80 terabytes as I go along. So there's a lot of kind of headroom to upgrade into it, but you don't have to do all that at once.
Yeah. I mean, that's extreme. 80 terabytes of anything. I don't even think. I'd say probably the images I've kept, we're probably at like 12, maybe 15 terabytes total. But I'm pretty like I only deliver like a maximum. I don't care what the wedding is. It's 1,000 images. And I typically don't deliver even around there. It's like between 800 and 900. Past that is I'm overdoing it. At least in my opinion. So there's not that many raws per wedding left over, 800 or 900, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of the same way. I don't deliver typically more than about 800 or so, but the difference is I just keep everything versus getting rid of everything but those 800.
Yeah. You've got like the full, I'm going to go back and check everything out, which is great. I mean, that's honestly a way that I think we should all like aim towards being, is just having this system to where everything is good to go. I personally don't have a neighbor I could just go drop a hard drive off with, but I move cross country, so we'll see.
I will say the other benefit to keeping everything is that I have had couples come back and they've like either they've lost a parent, they've lost a grandparent, they've lost a father, and they're like, hey, look, like, do you have any other photos of like my dad? Like he passed away from whatever reason, and I don't care. And like I've had couples be like, hey, I don't care if they're like super similar to ones we already have. It's just like, I'm really sad right now. I just want a couple more photos of my dad. If you've got anything at all, even if it's like funny or weird, or he's making an odd face, just anything at all. Sure. And to have all those extra photos other than the ones you just delivered, it's nice to kind of be able to go back and sort through and see if you do have 1 or 2 extras that you can kind of deliver. It just kind of helps you kind of go that extra mile when somebody is just looking for, something a little extra. And, I'd hate to cap that, be like, yeah, nope, sorry. Everything's gone. I deleted it all. So what you got is what you got. But,
yeah, I mean, that does make sense. I guess the idea of someone coming back, it just hasn't happened. Like for me personally, it just hasn't happened. I've had people pass away, but the answer has always been like, nope, the photos that we have is that's what what I delivered is correct. And for me, the idea that I would be hoarding images that were like deliverable, and it's just, I don't want to explain that. Like, oh yeah, I was just holding on to these. You know what I mean? I think just for me, it muddies things up.
I think people get it though. I mean, they understand that you're not going to deliver. I mean, because people don't want 1,800 photo galleries where 20 photos are virtually identical. I mean, they get that you're going to take a bunch that are going to be nearly. I mean, I think people are smart enough to understand that. They get it. So for me, I've had a couple of people come back, ask for additional, and it's never been an issue. So it's just something I prefer to do. I don't think there's really necessarily a right or wrong way on it. It's just, again, it's the way I personally go about doing things. But yeah, so we kind of covered most of those big drives. I guess the last one I haven't talked about is I do have a short-term cloud backup as well. So again, I don't I don't do the whole Backblaze thing. What
Sure.
I do is I still have my Dropbox, and with my Dropbox account, what I do is I take everything that's on that 2 terabyte drive, because again, that 2 terabyte drive is basically all my current projects, all my current weddings, anything that I'm still editing is on that. And so for two reasons: one, because it's fast, and the other we'll get to in a second. But what I basically do is I make a mirror of that, so everything that's on that SSD gets basically copied up into Dropbox as well, because that kind of gives me an additional level of offsite storage for anything that I'm currently working on. So like basically that covers me in like the most extreme of extreme cases. Let's say like, because I mentioned earlier, I've got an offsite backup at my buddy's house who's down the street, but let's say like this whole area floods, right? Let's say
Sure.
it's not like my house that burns down, but let's say the whole area floods, or let's say there's a tornado that comes through, rips through my house, rips through his house, everything's gone, right?
Right.
So at the bare minimum, I want to be able to go back and be able to download everything that I'm currently working on and that I haven't delivered. And that's what that cloud backup for all my active projects covers. So it basically covers me for like every possible act of God, right? So unless there's two tornadoes simultaneously, one here and one in Utah, that wipes out both Dropbox servers and all my copies, which in that case, then I did something really bad in life, and the heavens hate me. So at that point, I mean, I can't be any more prepared than that. So for me, having that SSD kind of backed up to that Dropbox or any sort of cloud service, it kind of just covers me in the event of like the absolute worst case scenario. And also really quick, just to kind of go back, if for anybody who's
Sure.
looking at this and trying to like think about ways that they can maybe implement some of this into their system, just to be really clear, like as far as the NAS goes, you don't have to have that. Like for me, that is something that is, I incorporated into my system because I got tired of having like 5 or 6 or 7 different hard drives plugged into my computer at once. I wanted one massive place where I could store everything. And so that's what the NAS device covers. Also, the fact that it's set up in a RAID configuration gives me a little bit of extra protection over a standard hard drive as well. But ultimately, if you're looking to kind of copy this and mirror this for your own system, you can replace that NAS device with any sort of large hard drive, or even multiple hard drives if you really want to. The only disadvantage that you're going to have is that you're going to have multiple hard drives plugged in your computer to access everything. But again, that NAS device for me is really just, I get the extra security of having a RAID set up on it, and then I get the benefit of basically being able to access everything from one location. So that's really the main benefit for me for that. There are other things that the NAS is capable of, but for the purpose of this conversation, that's really the main purpose of it. So feel free to replace that with like a 10 terabyte, a 16 terabyte drive. I think there's 20 terabyte drives now. If you want to replace that with a single drive in the system, in the setup, you absolutely could, and then you could be able to roll and basically use the exact same system I'm running. You just won't be using a NAS, so just be using a standalone direct storage device, like a standard hard drive.
Sure. And then for people who aren't like totally familiar, what is a RAID? Like,
Yeah,
what does
so
that mean?
RAID, oh man, okay, you're gonna put me on the spot. It's like redundant array
Yeah.
of independent disks, I believe.
Okay.
Essentially, RAID is just it's an algorithmic process that basically takes data, and there's different ways of doing it, but essentially it secures your system. There's different versions of RAID. Some versions are built more towards speed. Some versions are built more towards safety. The most common ones for photographers or people, trying to protect data are going to be something like RAID 5 or RAID 6. Or if you have a Synology device, there's like the Synology hybrid RAID setups. But ultimately, what like something like a RAID 5 or a RAID 6 is going to do for you is it's going to give you like fault tolerance. So in my system right here, I'm running RAID 6. So if I have one drive that fails, I'm not going to lose all my data. So essentially the way it works is RAID takes that data and basically stripes it across all those different drives. And so if you have one drive that fails, you don't lose everything. So you can just, you'll get a warning. Mine will start beeping really loudly. I found that out the hard way in the middle of the night, and it'll start beeping. It'll let you know that it's detected an error. And if it's a failed drive, then you have the ability to pull that drive out, put a new drive in, and it'll start rebuilding all that data, and you won't lose anything. Now with
Okay.
RAID 5, that's totally fine. If with RAID 5, if you have two drives that fail at the same time, then you lose everything,
Mm.
because that data is kind of like spread across all those drives. And it's basically a single fault tolerant RAID system. So if you have one failure, you're fine. If you have two failures, you're screwed. Now with RAID 6, it's basically two drive redundant. So if you have one drive that fails, no big deal, pop that drive out, replace it, you're good. If you have two drives that fail, you're still okay with RAID 6. Pull both those drives out, replace both of them, you're still good. You're not going to lose any data. It's not until you lose the third drive at the same time that you're going to have an issue. And again, at that point, if you're going to have three drive failures all at the same time, then again, there's no perfect system that's out there that's going to perfectly be able to protect you. It's just about trying to find a level of safety that you're comfortable with. And for me, that's a level that I'm pretty happy with. Like if I have that kind of level of failure, then I mean, again, the world is just against me, and
You've
I'm pretty
upset
much,
somebody.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I said something I shouldn't have, and
God's mad at Kevin.
the universe is punishing me. So, in my opinion, that's more than acceptable. I'm happy with that kind of that risk tolerance. So,
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's one of these things where like I know how important it is to have all these things backed up and have the multiple backups, but I'm the type of person where I've mainly, and maybe to a fault, like just really relied on like the cloud itself. Like, all right, well, I've got it in the hard drives and I have like my main like 5 or 6 lacy drives, or I think at this point I'm using Phantom for the most part, but I've had those, and then they're backed up into the cloud, and then the cloud is backed up into a different cloud. I have lots of clouds. Um, and that's been kind of like my main system, but the idea of having this like redundant thing just kind of chilling at the house, and then another offsite thing that I'm actually in charge of, doesn't sound like the worst way to go about it. I think it's probably got a lot. It feels like it has a lot more safety than most of the other methods.
I mean, maybe I suppose. I mean, for me, again, it's about finding something that works for you, that gives you a certain level of protection that you're happy with. It's about knowing
Yeah.
like what your risk tolerance is. Some people have a lower risk tolerance for certain things than others. For me, in losing photos or not having them, I've got a fairly low, level of risk that I'm willing to accept. But for me, like this has just been a system that I put together that I'm happy with. It fits my preferences, and it allows me to keep everything organized, allows me to keep everything archived for basically a long term. And for me, it's just, yeah, it's what works. But you just got to find something that works for you. The main thing is just making sure that, for anything that you have active, anything that you haven't delivered yet, at a bare minimum, you just make sure you've got, multiple copies, on location, because if you have one drive that fails or corrupts, you got something you can rebuild it from. And then the other thing is just make sure you've got some sort of offsite storage, because if your home burns down or you have a flood in your house, a water main breaks, whatever, you need some way to be able to recover that data, again, specifically for, at a bare minimum, everything that you haven't delivered to your clients yet. To me, those are really kind of the main points you have to hit. If you can get to that, then you're doing pretty well. And then the other thing too is just making sure, in my opinion, that you've got a system that is easy to maintain. And that's the other thing too that I think you can really get into. And I've seen, when I was doing my research, I saw some really elaborate systems, but they were super complicated. And I knew that for me to go through all those steps and all the amount of active work that would require from me to make that happen, that it probably wasn't going to be something that I would follow through on. So that the most important thing there as well to think about is make sure that whatever system you go with, it's a system that you're actually going to implement and you're actually going to maintain and keep up with. Because as soon as you start getting lazy with it and not maintaining it, then that system breaks apart and you open yourself up to losing things. So again, just multiple on-site backups, at least one off-site backup, and make sure that whatever system you're using, it's easy enough that you can actually maintain it. It doesn't feel like a chore or that requires a ton of extra work on your end. So
Yeah.
those are the big things that I would say to think about when thinking of your own backup and kind of workflow process.
So in terms of like hard drives and SD cards, do you have a specific brand you stick to, or are you someone who buys a bunch of different brands?
For the most part, I tend to stick with Samsung, not really for any particular reason. I don't have any sort of affinity for them, or
Sure.
there's anything particular about that brand. It's just that it tends to be what works. Like my SSD that I have, like the T7 drives, they're small, they're compact. I like them. They're easy to take with me when I travel. And then as far as like the NAS drives, again, they're Seagate drives. And I tend to use those for my actual physical hard drives, like the spinny ones.
Sure.
But not for any particular reason other than Seagate. They're a well-respected brand, and usually can catch the Iron Wolf NAS ones on sale over at Micro Center or B&H or wherever you want to buy them from. So nothing really specific there. I would just say just make sure that whatever you're investing in, it's a reputable brand. So Seagate, Western Digital, any of those, and you should be good.
Yeah. Well, I am thoroughly I've learned a lot of stuff today. I don't know about you guys in the comments. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of add to the subject of backups and hard drives? And
No, not really. I mean, I don't know if there's any questions that you've seen or any questions that we can maybe go through. We can maybe
there's a
answer
couple. I
if those
mean,
right away.
so Sam's asking about Google Drive as far as a backup solution. I personally, I have Google Drive because it's included with my email system, but I don't love it as a backup option for many reasons. It seems like it's less efficient at actually getting me my files. Like when I want to download something, if it's over like 5 gigabytes, half the time the download fails midway through, and it's not the internet service. It's a Google Drive specific thing, because when I do it through Dropbox, it's not a big issue. Backblaze for me has been that's my go-to for cloud backups.
Yeah, and Backblaze is definitely a really good option. I mean, and it's not something that I've gone with. I've talked to one of the reps at one point, and they did say, I mean, for me in particular, if I wanted to say have something that was going to mirror my NAS device, it was gonna be something like $5 a terabyte. And when you've got something like 17 terabytes of data, that's a lot of money a month just to back that up to their service. So I just keep with the Dropbox account that I've had forever. And again, I just keep my active stuff up there. I mean, as long as Google Drive is working for you for like some sort of offsite kind of like a cloud storage, and you're able to get what you want up there, I think that works totally fine. I mean, and again, my main thing would be, at a bare minimum, just make sure that whatever active weddings that you're working on or any sort of other shoot that you're doing that you haven't delivered to a paying client yet, make sure that stuff is backed up to the cloud, whether it's Google Drive or Dropbox or Backblaze. I think that's what's most important. But ultimately, whatever whatever workflow or whatever user interface that you prefer, just go with that.
Yeah, you really can't go wrong. You really can't go wrong with online backup systems. They probably have insurance. Your insurance will also cover. You can get your insurance to actually cover your backups if you want it to. So at the very least, you should be able to get those images back from those if that's your like, I don't know, midway backup system.
Right.
Let's see if I can find any other questions that came on up. By the way, if you guys do have questions, feel free to drop them in. My mind is still kind of blown with the whole system that you have there. So I don't have any personal questions other than I need to go buy a RAID system now.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, there's a lot to it for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's just maybe we can post that little map somewhere, that kind of like layout that I have of kind of like the system that I have. I think having that and kind of seeing it visually can kind of help kind of piece all the bits together.
Yeah, I've definitely I'm good with dropping any sort of resources you want inside the group and make sure it's available for people to go through. Again, if you guys are wondering what that little mock-up of Kevin's system looked like, it's this. So he's got a short-term cloud backup, which looks like Dropbox, short-term backup and editing, local travel SSD, which is a Samsung T7. That's going into Lightroom, and then that's being backed up again into his RAID system, which is being duplicated again into a off term archive of, I think are these all 8 terabytes, or do you have 8 single terabyte hard drives?
Inside the NAS device, you mean?
No, I mean off on the offsite.
Oh, the offsite, it's kind of a mix. So what I ended up doing was when I kind of switched over to the system, I had a bunch of like external enclosures that I had. Some were like 4 terabytes, some were 6 terabytes. And then I had 1 or 2 that were 8 terabytes. What I ended up doing, so earlier you asked about what shucking means. So shucking, just basically, it's like shucking like an ear of corn, right? So you're basically just pulling the physical hard drive out of the enclosure. And then what I did is I just took them all out of the actual physical enclosure and I store them in these. And then when I need to access the data, I just plug them into my little hard drive dock. And then that way I can get to the data there. I just prefer doing it that way because with different hard drive enclosures and trying to store them, especially at somebody else's place, it's just more burdensome. And then you got to keep track of power cables that go along with them and the specific, S or USB table, whatever. This is just way easier. And so, yeah, so as far as everything that's in here, they're just raw hard drives. I just pulled the drive out of them and whatever they happen to be, whether it's 4 or 6, whatever. And I kind of have them roughly broken down by year, but then they just get stored in these little cases somewhere else.
Cool. All right. Well, let's see, Sammy says, for having a long-term backup, do you offer a lifelong backup for your wedding clients? So is that like a brand promise that you deliver on them?
It's not really a brand promise that I deliver, only because data storage is not an easy matter. I mean, even companies like Facebook and and YouTube or whatever, like obviously they're dealing at a much higher level, but like even for them, that's one of the biggest challenges of running their businesses, is just maintaining all that storage space. And drives do fail, and even as secure as I am, I would never, I would never offer lifetime storage, because the other thing to keep in mind too is that hard drives, SD drives, doesn't matter what type of drive you have, over time they do break down. And they will eventually fail. So even like these archive drives that I have,
Sure.
if I really wanted a lifetime archive, then what I would have to do is basically every 4 to 5 years, I'd have to go back and recopy that data to a fresh drive. And then obviously that just is going to compound every 5 to 10 years. Once you've got 20, 30, 40 archive drives, you have to then every 5 years recopy. Like that's just, yeah, to me, I can't do that. That's too much. So for me, it's at basically the point to where I'm comfortable. I've got the data for a fairly long period of time. I do have drives going all the way back to 2006 that still work. So like the 4 to 5 year lifetime that manufacturers give you isn't really, drives will last a lot longer than that.
Sure.
But I could never, trying to do a lifetime storage option would just be way too much of a burden. I could never promise that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I might offer as far as lifetime storage is the actual final edits. I mean, they're backed up in two different places on the cloud, and then I have the actual the software that the couples have, and then I have my hard copies stored. Like I could maybe say like, yeah, you'll get your, I always have copies of your edited files, but if we're talking about raws, no, I would never offer that. And I, for my brand, really the most I offer is a 10-year backup. Like that's all I'm guaranteed to do. And most couples are still only getting like that 5-year tier. That's like the brand standard for me. It's different for
Yep.
most photographers too.
Yeah, well, I mean, even 10 years is a long time. I mean, I'm
Yep.
curious, like, what do you do with that data that you plan to keep for 10 years? Like, if you've got that you're saying you're guaranteeing for 10 years, what are you doing with that? Because 10 years is a long time for a single storage device to kind of, granted, if it's an archive thing, it's probably not going to be in continuous use and it'll
Sure.
extend its life a little bit, but still 10 years is a long time to promise data if you're not like
I
a
mean,
data.
it's not, so it's data that's kept in 3 different places. So I have I have it in my Dropbox. I have like a wedding photographer specific Dropbox that has all my images inside of it. Then I have like I don't know if you guys know this, but if you have an Amazon Prime membership, you actually get free storage from them for photos. So I upload all my galleries into that, into Amazon Photos. Then I have PicTime itself, and then Google Drive to an extent as well. And so there are a lot. So like Google Drive is like my literal, like I have it because I'm already paying for it. But basically every completed session, the edited files go in there. So not like raw storage, none of that stuff. It is just edited files that the client has actually already had delivered. Those are my backups. And so that's kind of the plan I have there. Now, if I need to move it to another storage facility, there's Backblaze in there too. If I need to move it to another storage facility, then it is what it is. But at least on a cloud basis, the edited files are kept.
Got it.
So it's not
Okay.
like I'm maintaining like a bunch of drives for 10 years. I have backups
Right.
of the images that I've actually edited. But yeah,
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense then.
yeah, no, I'm not saying like, oh yeah, I'll re-edit your photos to how I have them now. If I change my editing style in the next couple of years.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, even a little bit of that still maintains that Backblaze is going to exist, or that Google is going to continue offering photo storage, or they're not going to cut their storage size. I mean, there's still some potential issues there
I
as
mean,
well. But
if they do stop offering any of those services, they're going to send an email and let me know that, hey, we're not doing this anymore. And then also the idea that like all 5 of those platforms would just completely shut down seems very, very unlikely.
yeah,
And even
true.
if I change platforms like from PicTime to Pixieset or wherever I was at before, um, that's still copied into a new system and held that way. So I feel relatively safe saying like, yeah, the cloud backups are good enough for your edited images. Because realistically, I'm not going to send them an SD card and mail it over and all that stuff in the first place. They needed like a downloadable link. They just click, it's zipped, and they're good to go. Like I said, I just, for me, I don't think that all of those cloud solutions are going to go away. I think maybe 1 or 2 of them might go away, and then I'll just I'll find whatever the new option is.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you'll certainly get an opportunity to move them somewhere else if you need to, if any of them were to shut down. But yeah, 10 years, yeah, even for me, that's in everything, and where I store everything. For me, that would be a bit long to
A little bit of
promise things.
anxiety.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it'd be a lot of work, is essentially what it come down to. It would be doable, but keeping track of which ones I need to keep track of and which ones need to be maintained that long, and yeah, it's a long time to guarantee things. But
Yeah.
I always tell couples that, hey, look, like, I don't guarantee anything past a year, but like, if you ever reach out, if you ever need them, if you lose them, let me know. And also, I guess, kind of on the same kind of theme of things, something else that if you don't already do, I highly recommend it, is after you deliver your photos, have like an email in your email kind of chain that sends out like an informative thing to your couple that says, hey, look, like, you got your gallery last week, whatever, and here are some tips to make sure that you never lose your photos. And I kind of send that out to them, and it has some actionable things they can do. Like, hey, like, take your photos, make sure you actually download all of them. Don't just leave them in your PicTime gallery and download 5 or 6 or whatever.
Sure.
Download all of them, put them on like a hard drive, a USB, put them on 2 USBs, take one, leave it at a parent's house, a friend's house, whatever, keep one locally. Just some tips to make sure that they're doing what they need to do to make sure their photos are safe. Because like, I make it clear to them, well, it's clear in the contract anyway, that after they've received delivery of their photos, they basically have basically a year of their gallery. And then after that, like, it's on them, and I don't guarantee anything. So I just make sure that they know, like, hey, here's some steps to take that make sure that forever you'll have everything. And then also part of that is print some damn photos. So
yeah. So I mean, I'll definitely remind them of printing things. That's pretty constant throughout the process. But the online backup, like, hey, download your whole gallery, make sure you have it on at least one hard drive, and then make sure you back it up to at least the very least. I get them to put it on Amazon Photos, Drive, whatever, one of those services, if not two of them, if they can. That's kind of it as far as it goes. I do let them know, like, hey, I am backing this up into 5 or 6 different places, but do not rely on me. Like, make sure you have your own, because if, God forbid I pass or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
I don't know who
just
they're
make
gonna
sure
call.
that they know. Yeah, Ghostbusters.
Yeah, they're gonna call Ghostbusters.
They're gonna pull you out of retirement. But yeah, no, they'll. Yeah, I mean, that's the most
You just
important thing.
refer
Is
to
just
death as retirement.
Well, you not doing wedding photography anymore because you're
dead
now. Yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
But yeah, anyways, so just making sure that they know that they need to take some steps beyond just simply just downloading, a dozen or two photos from the gallery and going with that. They need to download themselves. They need to safeguard them as well on their own end, and they're their own first kind of gatekeepers, or it's their responsibility first for making sure their photos stay safe. They need to know that. So if you don't already have that in your process somewhere, to send an email and give them some steps on how to safeguard their photos on their side, I definitely recommend getting that set up and putting that in there.
Yeah. See, Brett commented something here. Google's AI will end humanity Terminator style before Amazon goes away. Sure.
Well, apparently, I mean, there's like a Google, he seemed like he was kind of crazy, a Google software engineer. He thinks that Google's AI is now sentient, apparently.
I have this theory that most people who are very successful in like AI learning are at least 5% crazy. Like pretty much across the board, at least everyone's 5%. He might be closer to 50, maybe 60. I don't know, but he's on there.
Yeah,
cool.
That's probably a safe assumption.
So it was awesome having you on, man. I like this. As mundane as like backup systems are, this is like one of the most important things I think you can do for your clients. And I definitely appreciate like you showing your whole flow, your system, what you're doing for backups. I learned a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's mundane until you have to go to your couple and tell them you lost their images. So yeah, I mean,
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
So yeah, definitely very important. Definitely something to think about. But yeah, hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully you enjoyed it. It was a pleasure being on. I enjoyed it, and yeah, I've never really done one of these before, so it was a good learning experience for me too.
Yeah, it's not bad. If you guys have any questions, you can drop them in the comments. I'm sure Kevin will see them, or I'll see them, or someone will see them, and we'll answer them back. But I'm gonna go ahead and sign off here. I will see you guys next week on Thursday at 2:30 p.m. This has been an interview with Kevin, and I'm pumped to have you guys in the group. Thanks.
Thanks, Roy.
Yep. All right. We're no longer live now.